Training. 10 people. Letting them all in. So the camera's right there. But good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute. I hear somebody.
It's gonna be 10 degrees today.
10 degrees?
Yeah.
Wow. It'll be like 75 in Egypt.
You know what?
Sorry. Unnecessary comment. My head's a little bit elsewhere at the moment, though.
When do you leave?
Tomorrow.
Leave tomorrow.
Huh?
Where are you going?
Egypt.
Huh? Where?
Egypt.
Egypt?
Yeah, just
Aw.
Egypt.
You have to tell me how your trip goes because it's on my bucket list.
I will.
You just got back from Dubai.
What? How was that?
Amazing.
Yeah, as you should. That's cool.
I love the Middle East. We just had one more person.
We to Japan next year. I'm super excited.
I'm jealous of that. Okay, we're good to go. Thanks for jumping on, everyone. And thank you to everyone who's in person today. I'm joined today by our pod leader, Angie Hannan, and we're going to be talking about the first and second appointment on a Zillow lead that you're taking. So Angie is one of our highest converters, which is why we're having her here for part 2 of how to convert as the top Zillow agent.
Thanks for having me, Joe.
Yeah, so like I said, today we're going to be talking about that initial appointment and being able to lock them in for multiple showings in the future. And so I guess I want to start at the very beginning.
Yeah.
And that before you've taken the AOM call, you've scheduled the appointment, and it's an hour before the appointment. Like, what are you doing to prepare for it? Or what are you reading in advance? Do you take anything with you on the appointment?
Sure. So every time I have a showing, especially with the Zillow lead, I text them usually a couple hours before the showing just to remind them and double check that we're still good to go. Nothing worse than showing up and having somebody no show you.
Right.
And most of the time, I would say 99% of the time, they respond to that and say yes. Before the showing, I always look at the listing itself to familiarize myself with the home and know just the simple statistics off my head, like number of bedrooms, bathrooms, garage stalls, square footage. And then if there's anything to note on the agent remarks, I make sure to read those in case there's something that I may not see that the agent's trying to point out about the house. And then I always look at the disclosure. I go through the disclosure quickly just on my own so I can understand if it tells me how old the roof is, if there's anything that's called out on the disclosure that I would like to tell my client, just to be armed with the most information. I don't typically bring the disclosure just because I don't like to waste it. But it's nice to have it pulled up on your phone so you can refer to it while you're there.
So you have it ready to go right there.
Yeah, I always have the listing pulled up on HomeSpotter when I'm there, just so if they have any questions, I can answer.
Be quiet.
Quiet.
Love you, Colin.
Sorry, I was telling my dog to be quiet.
So you were saying that you have it pulled up on HomeSpotter as well there.
Yeah, so, and then I always, before the appointment, I like to get there before the buyer, go in the house, turn all the lights on, do a quick walk around to make sure I can take note of anything that's worth noticing. That's when I usually go to the utility room and check out the age of the furnace and the water heater and check on the windows and see, are they newer? Are they older? Just to make sure I have some talking points for them. If I can't get there beforehand, or if they show up before me, then I just look at those things as we're going through. But ideally, I get there before them so I can
set yourself apart as the expert on the home.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
And what kind of stuff are you bringing with you anything paper-wise? Are you bringing any
Yeah, I usually bring the Pemberton folder with, the buyer's guide in there, my little info sheet, my card. And then if I've had the opportunity to print off the listing, I will, but not all the time do I do that just because they've seen it online and what's online is on the same paper.
Right.
And then I will usually put an agency form in there just to let them know, like, if we do move forward and work together, these are the different types of relationships and real estate. And so this is how I would be representing you. Just, because we're supposed to present that at the first substantial meeting with them. So those are the things I usually bring, and everything else is just in my brain or on HomeSpotter.
Absolutely. Do you bring out HomeSpotter in front of the client much, or are you using that more just to educate yourself if they ask a specific question?
More just for me to look at. If they have questions while we're there, I don't usually show it to them, but it's nice to be able to pull up the disclosure too on HomeSpotter while we're looking.
So you're introducing the house to the client. How close to the client are you saying? How much space are you giving them?
Yeah. So if I've been through the house before them, I like to have them just like a couple feet in front of me and just explain where they're going. If they, say if you want to turn left here, this is the hallway with the 3 bedrooms, and just let them kind of lead the way. If there's ever something that I want to point out specifically, I'll say, let me show you something that I'd like you to see. And then, I'll lead them over to that. But I do like to let them lead the way a bit, just because I want them to feel like, if I were to walk around this house, do I feel comfortable in it? And kind of get the lay of the land on their own and just follow behind with all the information that they need.
Right.
Yeah.
And have you ever started showing it's going really badly for the client? Like, what do you end up closing it sooner or?
Yeah. So I've definitely been to houses before when we walk in and somebody's just like, this is not what I thought this was going to be. The photos are very different from what this is. And, at one point I'll say, are you thinking that this house is way off and it's not something you'd even consider? And if they say yes, I'm like, well, we don't want to waste your time. Do you want to just leave? And so we will, if they want to. It's not worth looking around. But, if maybe something upstairs that they're not liking, but I know that there's a redeeming quality of the house downstairs, I'll say, like, let's not give up yet. I want to show you something downstairs. It's really cool.
Yeah.
And then you could always change this upstairs if you wanted to. So if it is one of those that I'm like, it's not what it looked like, I don't think they're going to like it, I will give them the opportunity to leave early for sure.
Right.
Good question.
Now, on the opposite side, let's say they love the home and you get through, you share all the information with them. I mean, where are you going with it from there?
Sure. So the first thing I'll do is I will send them the disclosure right away. I'll say, okay, here's some information on the house. I've given you most of it, but I want you to have a copy so you can look this over. One thing I forgot to mention before the showing, I like to call the listing agent just to find out what the interest has been and if there's any offers on the house, just so I know kind of where we're at. So based on that information, I can talk to my clients about, okay, there aren't any offers. This has been on the market for a couple weeks. Let's talk about what you want to do if you want to write an offer. The first thing to do is to, obviously make sure they're pre-approved and can buy a house, but then look at the disclosure. Let me look at some comps in the area, and then let's connect. So I'll usually say, what's your schedule look like? Can I call you in an hour after I look at comps and we can discuss an offer?
Sure.
And so that's typically how I do it, because it seems like most of the time, if people are able to see a house, they are free for the next few hours at least. So I always let them know, I'm going to call you in an hour and we can talk then. And then we discuss strategy and what we want to do.
And so you'll oftentimes bring up specifics on putting in the offer later that day on the phone.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about it too at the house sometimes. I always look to make sure there's no cameras or anything, because I don't want a seller to hear what we're talking about. So if at all possible, we'll go outside and do that away from the front door in case there's a ring camera. But I like to first discuss with them, okay, you like this house, list price is this, if our comps come in around this price, this is kind of what you're thinking for an offer, just to get their mind thinking. And yes, and then we discuss further when I call them back after I pull comps.
Absolutely. And so the showing goes really well. and you get to the very end of it, but you know, they don't really necessarily feel like it's going to be the one. And you're probably going to see multiple homes with them. How are you setting expectations for the client moving forward with how you're closing that appointment?
Sure. That happens a lot. You see a house that is just not the right one, and that's okay. I always talk to them about what they did like about it, what they didn't like about it, what are things that are definitely not going to be things that they want in a home. And then I'll look right then and there in the neighborhood that we're at and just see if there's anything else available right away for us to see if we have the time.
Hello, how much? How's it going?
If
Good.
there's not, then I let them know, okay, and if I haven't done this already, is get them on an MLS search. I will then talk to them about like, well, I know what you like, I know what areas you're like, you want to be in. What if I got you set up on the search and then I follow up with you, and then I'll give them a timeline. Like, do you want me to call you tonight? Do you want me to text you later today? Do you want me to call you tomorrow? And Mike, I think it was Mike Dix that said he gives like a certain time, like when should I call you? And that person tells them a specific time. And I think that's crucial because they're giving the time in the day.
Right.
So if you follow up at that time in the day, then they're more likely going to answer you. So
Carter Nelson.
Or Carter, maybe it was Carter. I can't remember if it was Mike or Carter, but it was awesome. And I've used that since he said that. And I think that's genius. And I think it works because it puts it in their hands. So that's what I'll do is say, let me know when I should call you or follow up with you on this. And I do. And then we just start setting up more properties. The other thing is if you first meet with them and they seem eager, but they're not pre-approved, we all know that that happens quite a bit. Talking to them at that first appointment about, you know, getting in touch with Matt or Colin or asking if they have reached out to any other lenders. That's when I do that as well, just because it looks like you're excited to buy a house. It looks like you really want to be in something and, you know, stop renting or move out of your parents' house. You should reach out to these guys and get pre-approved. And I think that also gives them something to do on their to-do list, like not only but
I have to ask everybody to please mute their phone.
They are all muted. People keep getting unmuted somehow.
That's so funny. Yeah, but that's when I talk about that too, is if they're not pre-approved, making sure that they get that process started.
Well said.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Absolutely.
Okay. So I'm curious, Angie, do you anywhere when on that first showing introduce like buyer consultation, or do you ask questions like, how familiar are you with the home buying process? Anything like that so that you can immediately start providing value to them as an expert in the industry?
Yeah, that just starts, that's normally what our conversation is about while we're walking through. Not only are we looking at the house, but I always ask those questions. I forgot to say it, so thank you. You know, just asking, how familiar are you with this process? Do you need me to help from point A to point Z? Have you done this before? You know, asking questions like that, definitely. I don't do a lot of separate buyer consults. I feel like my first meeting with them is that buyer consult.
I'm in the habit of doing that same thing, as much value as you can provide upfront.
Right. I did have one recently where it was a personal referral. So I called them and we were talking, but then I did meet them for coffee just to get to know them. But with Zillow, I think it's different because they're online, they see a house, they want to see it right now. So a lot of times you don't have that opportunity to be like, well, before we see the house, let's go get coffee. So it's kind of natural just to do it at that first showing.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that's what we've talked about so much with Zillow is the fact that a client is 80% more likely to transact after you get to meet them in person. And we know that most Zillow leads aren't going to put an offer on the very first home they see. And so seeing that very first home is really your opportunity to have a buyer's consult with them.
For sure.
And that's why we avoid any questions before the showing that could really drive sales resistance in that process. Hold those questions until you've been able to get face-to-face with that person and have a genuine relationship with them. So I think that's really well put.
80% of all buyers will work with the first agent they meet in person. That's why that first showing is so critical for developing a relationship with the client. And I think one thing that you're exceptional at is developing relationships with clients, because that's reflective in the reviews that you get, and it's reflective in just how happy your clients look on closing day as well.
Yeah.
I came in a few minutes late, so hopefully you don't mind if I ask another question.
No, please.
But I'm curious, how do you come prepared to a showing, Angie? So you do such a great job of developing the relationship piece. Are you bringing anything of value with, so that you have access to materials, or do you ask in advance that question?
We did touch on that
Okay,
question
got it.
already. She reads disclosures, she reads all the information, she shows up with seller packet.
Yeah, with the buyer
a
packet.
guide.
And I also, another thing I do too, if I'm looking on the disclosure, because I look at the disclosure every single time. And if there's any questions I have on like when things were done, I do pull permit history a lot of the times from the
Right.
city, just to see if I can tell them when the last time things were done, if it wasn't disclosed on the disclosure, especially if there's an alternatives. That's when I check that out and just have a list of, okay, HVAC was updated, then roof was done, then plumbing was updated, electrical, all that. So it's just nice to have those things, especially when the listing agent may not even
Right.
know those as well.
I'm glad you touched on that, because one of the reasons I wanted to highlight that is you are immediately distinguishing yourself as someone as different from someone who just opens the door.
Yeah.
So
I like to have more information, because I don't know, I don't like when I have to say, that's a good question, let me get back to you on that.
Mhm.
That's a fine answer if I don't know it, but I like to be able to say the answer, hopefully,
Absolutely.
more times than not.
right.
Set yourself up as the expert.
Yeah.
And every showing that you've done with any client in your history, you're kind of building on that, and you've learned the type of questions that buyers ask in advance or ask during the showing, right? So if you're proactive about doing that work up front, immediately you're different than someone else who's fuddling through their phone on a showing, or says, I'm going to have to call you back after the fact.
Do you feel like there are any most common questions that consumers will ask?
I mean, I feel like a lot of people ask, why are they selling? Which that I can't answer, unless it says in the agent remarks that it's relocation, there's things like that. But other than that, why are they selling? How long have they been in the home? Which we can answer. They ask a lot of times questions about the neighborhood, which we're limited on the things we can say about that. But I think those are the main questions. And then once we're in the house, like, do these windows seem okay to you? How old is that piece of equipment? Just kind of piece by piece questions.
Absolutely.
Do you do any research on the neighborhood, or do you drive through the neighborhood as you're kind of coming up to the house? Features?
I always drive through the neighborhood if time allows. If we have multiple showings, I can't always do that, but usually the first one, I will definitely check out the neighborhood, see if there's anything within walkability. I also said before, I like to get there early to make sure I can turn lights on first and walk through the house, just to make sure I can know what to point out. But yeah, I definitely like to check out the neighborhood. I don't always do a ton of research on the neighborhood prior to going, but I do like to drive around it before I get there.
Yeah, I think just familiarity goes a long way. So, knowing that you can say, hey, there's coffee shops that are within a mile or something like that. This is really easy access into the downtown area. There's a park that's, a couple blocks away for your kids, or if you have, dogs or something that you want to walk. Little things like that create familiarity with the area.
Definitely.
And I know you had talked about that before in a couple interviews we've done, so I just wanted you to kind of touch on that process again.
And I like to take so if I've been to this neighborhood before, I like to take different routes to get there sometimes, because sometimes you just take the same way your maps tell you to get there. And if you take a different route, you'll see different things. So I like to try to do that if I'm going to the same neighborhood a few times, just to check out what else.
I love that. We had a question in the chat here, and I'm glad you're here for this because you're mentioned in it. And it's from Colin. And he said, Angie, I know Jelena has a script she leads with right when she meets new leads. Do you have a go-to intro for new leads when you meet them? Starting that, Jelena, can we hear do you know what he's talking about?
I think so. What I like to do is I meet my clients outside of the door, and I talk to them a little bit about setting the expectation for the showing. So I'll ask, is this the first property you've gone out to see? If I haven't asked that on the phone with them, I'm asking them as soon as I meet them in person. And then I will set the tone for how the showing is going to go. So I'll let them know, here's what my goal is. I want to go inside and I want to look for anything that might be an opportunity for you to increase equity, or that will be something that's going to cost you money and I think, you know, might be a concern. So I'm going to have my eyes on more of like the structural elements and features of the house. I want you to think about how this home fits into your lifestyle. You know, does this work with your 5-year plan or 10-year plan for where you're going to be in your life? Are you planning on having children? Or if they already have children, you know, can they see themselves growing in the home? I want them to think about furniture placement and the things that they do on a day-to-day basis. How do they live in the home? Because then they're going to talk about it, and it's very easy for me to ask questions about it as we go throughout. So when I'm setting kind of the tone for the showing, that's the script that I use.
And I'm a little different. I touch on all of those things, but it's more of while we're going through the house that I talk about all that. When they first arrive, I do feel like I get to know people a little bit more on the phone than Zillow probably wants me to. But I like to just ask a couple questions about them before I meet them so that I kind of have an idea of already what they're looking for. So when they do get there, I'm always just like, I'm so excited to finally meet you. I'm so glad you're here to see this house. And then I say, let's just go in and we're going to walk around. I'm going to follow right behind you. I also do say, I'm going to look for things that I know to be on the lookout for that might be red flags or whatever, but I want you to walk through this as if you lived here and see if this would work for you. And then the conversation just kind of naturally flows like, do you plan on having kids? This would be a great place for a kid's bedroom. And this living room is huge. You have a like big recliner or a sofa. Do you like to watch games? And, you know, just kind of like feeling them out and basing my conversation style on that.
Very much the same process.
Yeah.
And I think that's a key to building a relationship with someone, because so many leads will come up not knowing what to expect from the agent they're meeting. And if you're making it all about them right away, it really tends to put them at ease. You don't come across as the pushy salesperson. You're the person who's looking out for them while they're thinking about how they're going to live in that home.
And as realtors, we all know we need to be chameleons. And
yes,
if you have somebody who is super outgoing and wants to talk about their life and what they're going to do in this house, great, run with that. But if there's somebody who is just quiet and doesn't say much, you know, you're probably just looking for this, you know, safety structural things about the house. Like, is this going to work for you? Can you see yourself living here? And not getting into the fluff of like, do you like to watch movies? And do you like to cook and entertain? Like, they may not be into that conversation. So feeling out your person is super important too.
That's what I call my Jesus method. Maybe I should call it the chameleon method.
Yes.
More political.
All things to all people.
Exactly.
Maybe I could like bring books in.
Question.
What was that?
I couldn't tell if that was a question or if they were just talking.
And so that's all that first initial showing. And one of the things that we wanted to focus on a little bit is getting to that second showing. So you're setting the expectation at the very end of that showing up like, hey, this is how often I'm going to be communicating with you. Do you usually end up finding a property that they want to see, or do they more often reach out with a property
I
that
feel
they're wanting
like
to see?
once we've established that relationship, which I try to do in the first meeting, if they are working on getting pre-approved first, that is a little bit of a different story because they need to work on that before we can really get out looking, you know, if they're serious about buying. Because I always tell them, I don't want you to fall in love with a house that you can't buy. So let's do this first so then we can do that. If they are ready to write offers, I feel like I follow up with them a lot with just a quick little text. How are the emails coming through? Do you like what you're seeing? Do you want me to change anything on the criteria? Most of the time they're like, nope, I really like what's coming through. I haven't seen anything quite yet that I want to look at, but I'll let you know. And so I just kind of check in every now and then, but they tend to just send me listings.
Right.
Hey, Angie, I saw this come on. Can we see this right away? And that typically is how it works for me. I do go on and check who's looking and who's last checked their emails. And if they haven't checked them in a while, I'll go in and reach out to them and just say, hey, it looks like you haven't, you know, seen any, or have you seen these listings come out? I don't want to tell them I'm stalking them and tell them that I know they haven't looked at it in 2 weeks, but I'll say, hey, what did you think of this house? Did you look at it? And then it gets them re-engaged sometimes and helps them just kind of get back in the flow of looking at things. But yeah, I would say most of the time they reach out to me once we have that relationship established they're getting the emails with the listings. I'm just checking in every now and then.
I was gonna say,
they'll
but you're
send-
still consistently
Yeah.
touching base with them.
for sure.
And most of the time that's text.
Yeah, I would say most of the time it's text. I feel like a lot of people respond best with text.
Yeah.
You know, there's some like the older generation that they like a phone call.
Mhm.
And if you know who you're dealing with, you know how to communicate with them.
Right.
But yeah, for the most part, I would say text.
Again, a chameleon.
Right. Gotta be able to change your colors.
Well said.
Right, I like that.
Jelena, do you have any questions you would add to that? Or any questions from the chat as well? Or to any of our guests in person today?
So I guess my question is, do you look at every first showing or second showing? And sometimes it's more than that, right? Like sometimes we might be doing 10 showings. Do you, with a client or a potential lead. Do you look at that as a waste of time, or do you see every showing as an opportunity to further develop a relationship with that person and refine what it is that they're looking for?
I look at it as an opportunity every single time, unless I find out that this person cannot buy a home, or it's usually not that they don't want to. It's usually they find out my financing is not ready yet. I need to wait a year. Other than that, I think it's an opportunity for sure, because they reached out for a reason. They have interest in buying a home, especially if they're pre-approved. I don't care. I want to find them the right place. I'm not the type of agent who's going to show them a place and tell them to write an offer because I think it's good for them. I need them to think it's good for them. If that means showing them 10 houses, yeah, that sucks, especially if I'm driving to St. Paul every time, but it's worth it in the end if they're happy.
And you built a really fantastic referral business off of that. So you're seeing the effects of putting the client first in the residual business that you're building in the process.
For sure.
What is the longest length of time that you worked with a particular buyer?
Over a year.
Over a year.
He was one of my first Zillow leads. He had a low budget. So he had to buy, he wanted a single family house under $130,000. And it was tough. And we looked and looked and looked and looked and looked. What year was that? This was 2022. He finally closed, I think. Wow. Yeah. But I mean, and in the end, I probably didn't make any money on it because of the money I spent on gas and how little I made on that commission. But he's forever going to be somebody who refers my name. And we still keep in touch. He sends me updates on this house that he bought, and he's so proud of it that it's just like, it was totally worth it.
I don't want to call it free business, because you didn't make much on the transaction, but it is free advertising because you have it in the process of saying it doesn't matter what price that is, put that person first. You will always be top of mind when they think about someone who needs a really great agent who is in it for the right reasons, doesn't have commission breath. And I wanted to highlight that because I know you had talked about a couple cases where you had worked with someone like a year and a half or maybe even 2 years. One of them, maybe this was the one.
I think it was Zane, him.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm supposed to say names.
Right. Well, we know that 38% of all of the Zillow leads that will transact at 8 months or longer. So there is a huge portion of leads that we have that are a long-term lead.
Yeah.
They might require more nurturing. It doesn't mean that you're going to do 40 or 50 showings with them in the first 3 to 6 months. That's not realistic.
Yeah.
And I would ask, how did you kind of maintain control of that process in nurturing that person to finally finding the right home?
Well, after a while, after seeing some houses, I knew what was too much work for him. And I knew what wouldn't work for him. So he would send me sometimes that I would check out, and I would look at the Tisch report, and I would look at, everything about the house, and I would call him and just say, honestly, I don't think this is the one. We can go check it out if you want, but I want you to know these things. And so I would point some things out, and he's like, oh gosh, no, I don't want to see that. Thank you so much for that. And so I would vet out some of the places he would send me. And so we would have like a month at a time where we didn't see something.
Mhm.
And then all of a sudden we'd see 2 or 3 and they wouldn't work, or we'd go a few weeks. So it wasn't like it was every week I was showing them stuff.
Right.
There were months in between, but I would definitely help not waste our time by looking into the houses before we went and looked at them if I knew they just weren't going to be what he wanted.
And I appreciate your sharing that so much, because I feel like sometimes agents feel like they are not in control of how to nurture or move the lead forward. And this is a perfect example of where you're the person representing the client well, but doing the due diligence to say, this is not a valuable use of my time or your time.
Mhm.
And if the goal is home ownership, we want to be looking at something that is realistic for you.
Right.
So you do an excellent job of that.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, of course.
Well said. You know, we had one question in the chat here. Kelly was asking like best practices to convert to moving someone from being a lead to a client. Do you know how you'd answer that?
Just continued follow up with them after they close. I pride myself on my closing gifts. I think they're really fun to do. But that's, a trivial thing. But I think that when you personalize them and you've gotten to know this client so well that you gift them something that is going to be touching to them and something they can have in their house forever.
Mhm.
I feel like that, along with keeping that relationship going, I don't stop talking to my clients after they close. Not only do I, send out like the newsletters from our marketing team, but I send out personal handwritten notes every now and then. I send texts. I'll send them birthday text messages and things like that. So just keeping them in my regular contact list of who I reach out to, I think converts them from a lead to a forever client.
Well said. Well said. Do we have any other questions that anyone asks?
I actually have a question. You may have briefly touched on it. How do you handle the people who want to continue to go out to new houses, but they do not want to get pre-approved?
That's a really good question.
So we're talking about somebody that wants to keep seeing homes but doesn't want to go through the work of getting pre-approved.
I asked them, tell me what this looks like to you if we found a house that is perfect and you can't write an offer.
Mm-hmm.
I say, I don't want to waste your time and I don't want to waste mine either. And I do not want to break your heart if you find something you love and you can't buy. So let's talk about why you can't or why you won't get pre-approved. And if it's because you need to work on your credit or you need to improve something, let's make that our goal. And we'll continue to check houses out online and just see what the market is putting out there. But I don't want to really look at a whole lot of places until you're ready to buy a house, because it's really hard when you want something and you literally can't write an offer on it. And I think most people are really receptive to that. And a lot of people are like, I don't want to waste your time either. Not a lot of times are they like, screw you, let's look anyway. It's fun,
I just wanted to see if your conversation was any different than mine.
Yeah. Yeah, it's important to make sure they're actually able to write an offer before you look at a bunch of houses with them.
Absolutely. Well, Angie, I want to thank you for coming on today, sharing your expertise and your knowledge with the whole team.
Sure, it was fun.
And thank you to.
Can I add one thing to
Yeah.
that? Okay, so I would like to say that at our award ceremony, you will have noticed that we had our 3 top agents were all sales coordinators, right? I want to highlight what an amazing job I think you do with that. You set a great example. You do an excellent job with conversion. Clearly one of the top sellers in the company. And so to me, that instills confidence when we selected you or you were selected as a sales coordinator and how you could help other agents continue to build their business. And so I want to thank you very much for taking that on for the company as well. And I also want to say how lucky I think everyone who is in your pod is for having you as a resource and a leader to help them with their business. So
I appreciate that.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, Kel. Hi. How are you?